right. Hello, 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 and welcome to another exciting edition of This Week in Space. What up, Jesse Brown? Nice to see you, my friend. Yeah, we're here because it's Monday at 11-ish Mountain Time. And I like to show up here at this time, at this place, to give you all the breakdown of what's happening in space for the week. Excuse me. Um, However, I am going to be co-facilitating a dreaming retreat in Greece, which is going to be starting May 5th. So I'm going to be out for a little while. I'll probably pick up this program back in June. Yo, what's up? Nice to see you. Um, yeah, gonna take a little hiatus from this week in space, and I'll catch you all in June. Also, I think I'm taking a break from the Melee report. I was trying to get one out for the Scorpio full moon, but I don't think it's in the cards. Yeah, y'all will be fine out there without me, but just don't forget about me, all right? Yeah. I think that's all the announcements that I have. This week's episode, we're going to focus mostly on two transits, Venus trining Pluto, which I kind of got a little obsessed with and did a deep dive into the story of Cupid and Psyche. So I'm going to talk about that for a little while today, and then we'll be focusing also on the Mercury Chiron conjunction, which will be part of the Scorpio full moon. I'll also touch on that as well. So I just wanted to give folks a heads up. And I don't know how long this is going to be. I kind of geeked out on the Cupid and Psyche story because you know I love a story. Yeah, this might run a little long, but that's all right because I'm going to be out for a little while. So I figured I would leave you with some food for thought. So, without further ado, let's get all up in it. We are looking at this week in space for April the 27th, 2026 through May the 3rd of 2026. And before we get into the astrology of the week, just a brief little recap because we had Uranus move into Gemini. Mercury ruled mutable air sign. That occurred this past Saturday, April 25th. And this was the third big planetary sign shift of this year, which followed the Neptune and Saturn entering into Aries, which happened in the early days of 2026. And almost immediately after Uranus entered Gemini, there was an active shooter at the White House Correspondents' Dinner, which is an event filled with journalists. And journalists are Mercury and Gemini figures because they are spreading information. And so, as soon as Uranus moved into this Mercury ruled sign of Gemini, there's a sudden, unpredictable event that is destabilizing, a very Uranian event at a dinner full of mercurial people. And the response to this that I have seen so far is that everyone thinks that this was a staged false flag operation so that Trump could build his pet project ballroom, which kind of further highlights the way that Uranus in Gemini will function, kind of questioning the truth of events and the fast-paced information overload with which both desensitizes and also calls into question what is actually happening. And the kind of conspiracy theories are already popping off all over the place with this one, which gives us a clue as to the vibe of Uranus in Gemini. And also, I think that there is a kind of circus-esque quality to life in general, but also to this event. And I think that Mercury and Uranus in their relationship with Prometheus are both tricksters. And this whole kind of like circus atmosphere, which I think is kind of an obfuscation, which is like sort of look over here, look over here. Meanwhile, some other nefarious shit is happening in the background. And so that's something to pay attention to. Don't get too pulled into the circus and the spectacle and miss sort of what's going on between the lines. So I just wanted to kind of toss that out there to kick off this week's show because sometimes the astrology is just so on point where it's like, okay, Uranus entering Gemini, like sudden, unpredictable, destabilizing events, dealing with the exchange of information. And then, like, an hour after that ingress occurred, there is this shooting or, yeah, active shooter at the White House Correspondents' Dinner. And I'm just like, damn, okay, that's how you manifested. That's pretty spot on. So, that brings us to the first transit that we'll be talking about this week. We have Venus in Gemini, trine Pluto in Aquarius. This is happening at 5 degrees and 29 arc minutes of these air signs. And let me share my screen for the folks on the YouTube. If I can figure out how to do that. There we go. All right, so looks pretty confusing here, a lot going on, but what we are looking at is Pluto over here in the fixed air sign of Aquarius, in this blue line, this trine to Venus over here at 5 degrees of the mutable air sign of Gemini. Venus just separating from the conjunction to Uranus that happened in Taurus right before they both ingressed into Gemini. Okay. So away we go. Let me take a sip of my beverage. So Venus is the planet of love, relationships, and beauty. And Pluto is an underworld god who rules over our shadow material as well as our survival drives and the fear that these survival instincts or drives conjure. And Pluto ultimately provides initiation into power. In this trine aspect, we have a harmonious relationship between the high flying and airy Venus and Gemini and the chthonic god Pluto, who lives in the earth. And this supportive trine got me thinking about the myth of Cupid and Psyche. And I just picked up a copy of this book, which is Myth Astrology, Volume 1, Planets and Signs by Raven Caldera. And it's a pretty excellent book. It goes through all of the planets in the various signs and equates them with myths. And Raven connects Venus and Gemini with Cupid. And that kind of got me thinking about the Cupid and Psyche myth or Eros and Psyche. And I reference this book by Eric Newman, which is pretty good mythic analysis of this Cupid and Psyche myth. It's called Amor and Psyche, the Psychic Development of the Feminine. And this was written in the 50s and it's very kind of like gendered, which I don't particularly agree with, but there's some good concepts in there. So anyway, that's sort of the references that I'm using here. So on to the tale. Psyche is the youngest of three daughters, and Psyche's beauty is renowned all over the land. In fact, she is so beautiful that people start comparing her to Aphrodite. And Aphrodite is not too happy that her divine beauty is being challenged by a mere mortal girl. So she sends her son Eros, Cupid, to make Psyche fall in love with the most hideous and vile of men, which Eros sets off to do. However, when he sees Psyche, he is enchanted with her beauty and he kind of fumbles his bow and arrow and cuts himself and then sees Psyche again and falls madly and hopelessly in love with her. Meanwhile, Psyche's parents are afraid that their daughter will never marry because her beauty is too intimidating, too perfect for any suitor to want to approach her. So her parents consult Apollo's oracle, which basically says that what they need to do is take her to a mountain and wed her to a hideous monster. And so this marriage would be a funeral wedding. And her parents are instructed to go to the top of the hill where she will marry not a man, but a serpent like monster. And Psyche goes along with this plan and kind of surrenders to it and accepts her fate. And she is led to the mountaintop and falls asleep, waiting for her monster groom to come and take her away. And here's the first image of Venus and Pluto, the funeral marriage, the surrender to the unknown power of love, which may devour or destroy us. However, instead of being consumed by a serpent like monster, Psyche is carried by the wind up to a giant house in the clouds. She goes inside and is bathed in luxury and given good snacks to eat and all the things that Venus really loves. And at night, she meets her husband, who happens to be Eros, who kind of orchestrated this whole thing. Eros tells her that she can live in this house and enjoy her life and do whatever she wants. He'll be gone during the day, but he'll come back at night and they can make love. But they can only do it in the dark, and she can never see him. And Psyche thinks that's a bit weird, but sounds like a good deal, so she agrees. So here we begin to see that Venus and Gemini emerging. This kind of ideal relationship that lives in a house in the clouds and never touches the ground or sees the truth about the relationship that we are in. We just see the ideal or the imagination about what we want it to be. And Cupid and Psyche only meet in darkness. So Psyche can never really see him or truly know him. Psyche means soul, and Eros is the desire and the sort of life force that pulls us into life. And although they are together, there is still a separation between the soul and love or desire. They are unintegrated and only interact in the dark and not the light of consciousness. Psyche is kind of kept at arm's length, placated by the image and the ideal, which is not grounded in an earthly love. And Eros is ashamed about his love for Psyche because if his mom found out he fell in love with her competition, she'd be pissed. And so he tries to hide what's going on and to kind of have it both ways. He is Aphrodite's accomplice by day and Psyche's husband by night, keeping his relationships compartmentalized and separate, which is kind of a Gemini thing, maintaining the separation between the soul and eros, the erotic or the full sensual experience of life, and the soul and the integrated consciousness. So Psyche, after a while, she's digging this, but she begins to miss actual connection and asks Eros one night to bring her sisters to this mansion in the clouds because she misses them and misses being in connection with people. Eros is like, I don't really think that's a good idea, but Psyche, pleads and pleads. And so Eros goes and gets Psyche's sisters, who are some jealous chicken heads, and they take one look at how Psyche is living and they decide to break up this situation because they want this for themselves. They tell Psyche that she is actually married to a monster and she needs to see him and kill him before he devours her. They tell her that when he comes back tonight to light a lantern and then stab this monster to death. So that night, when Eros returns and after they make love, Psyche lights the lantern and goes for the knife that she has stashed under her pillow. But as soon as the light illuminates Eros's sleeping form, she realizes how beautiful her husband is and is shocked because he is definitely not a monster, and actually he's like pretty hot. In her surprise, she spills a little of the hot lamp oil on his leg, and Eros wakes up and says, "You broke my trust, and now I'm leaving," and he flies off in a huff. Here we see Venus and Gemini kind of panicking when they are seen, when the illusion is illuminated and the bubble is popped. And while Psyche falls deeper for the beauty of her partner, Eros gets all freaked out because there's this belief that once we are truly seen, once the ideal is brought down to earth, it will destroy it. And so Eros escapes. We could also see their love affair being carried out in the dark as a unconscious love. And once it is illuminated, there's a kind of freak out. We can think about this as the parts of ourselves that we don't want to look at, or the parts of ourselves that we don't want to be seen. And enter Pluto again, the unconscious and the shadow. the thing that we hide from in ourselves, that freak out when they are seen in the light. This transit, Venus and Pluto and trine, calls us to hold a light up to these dark places, which are oftentimes activated and reflected back to us once we come into a relationship with others. With Pluto in aspect to Venus here, it brings in the fear of vulnerability and heartbreak that we must accept whenever we fall in love. If we keep the love in the clouds and the idea of love, we may never have to come down to earth and be hurt. But that is not actual love, that is a fantasy. Pluto is a planet of transformation, and we are transformed by falling in love and opening to the vulnerability that love requires. This is something that neither Eros nor Psyche were ready for. And once the rift is created in their relationship, they are forced to come to Earth and address their relationship within themselves and with each other in new ways, which will ultimately transform both of them. So Psyche comes to Earth and falls into a deep depression, but she sets off looking for Eros. Eros returns to Olympus and is grounded by his mom. Eros returns to the love he knew, the familial love which keeps him trapped, while Psyche is forced out of her comfort zone into new psychological territory. After much searching, Psyche petitions Aphrodite and begs her for help to find Eros. Aphrodite sets out a series of tasks which she hopes will destroy Psyche once and for all. First, she must sort out an enormous mountain of grains, lentils, wheat, barley, millet, chickpeas, beans, and poppies before the sun rises. This is similar to the test that Baba Yaga sets for Vasilisa, which I talked about a few weeks ago. Um, Psyche is overwhelmed by this test, but she approaches it the same way Vasilisa does. Basically, she falls asleep. And while she is sleeping, the piles are sorted by ants who took pity on her while she is passed out. And we can think about this as, whoa, excuse me, I just lost my place in my notes. There we go. Okay. So Psyche falls into a deep depression, falls asleep. The piles are sorted out by ants who took pity on her while she sleeps. And we can think about this as the intuition or the unconscious mind working through our issues in ways that the conscious mind cannot. The unconscious process the unconscious processes the overwhelm and the feelings of despair, which allows us to work through the issues presented to us, which is not possible when we are trying to think through and solve our problems on a rational or logical level. This is part of the transformation that Pluto offers, being pulled down into the underworld, feeling of overwhelm and depression that paralyzes the ego to force us into contact with the unconscious and the wisdom that operates there. The next test is for Psyche to gather the golden fleece from the rams of the sun, who are terrifying and fierce. Psyche cries out, "What an order! I can't go through with it," and wants to end it all right there. But a reed on the bank of the river whispers to her and tells her she can collect the golden fleece from the bushes where it has become stuck once the sun sets and the rams are no longer at full strength, and she doesn't actually have to approach them. Again, this is the intuitive sense or the unconscious that helps to carry Psyche through what seems like an impossible situation. And again, this test breaks down the ego-centered perception of the self and allows an opening into the wisdom of the intuition and unconscious. The wisdom here is not to go straight for the gold, but rather to be patient and gather it bit by bit. When we are faced with something more powerful than ourselves or than our conscious ego, the wisdom is to not rush right in and battle it, or to give up and disassociate and check out. And the rushing right in and battling it might be the Venus in Aries. But now that we've moved into Gemini, there's maybe a different approach. And the approach here is to approach it patiently and slowly. to gather the gold or the power that it represents little by little, to not overwhelm the system or to rush into danger. And this is the only way that we can work with Pluto consciously, lest we get sucked under and overwhelmed. We just got to take it little by little. Next, Psyche has to gather water from the river Styx, so she enters into the realms of Pluto. And here we are moving from the idealized fantasy of the house in the clouds down to the earthbound reality and the tasks of soul making, and then into the depths of the underworld and a meeting with the shadow. Psyche is aided by a high-flying eagle who gathers the water of Styx for her. And here we have an image of that airy ideal descending into the depths to contact what flows beneath the surface of our conscious life, the meeting of the above and the below. And the river Styx, I'm kind of fascinated by the river Styx and also by the band Styx. And the river Styx is an ice cold river that brings death to anyone who touches it. It is the boundary between the world of the living and the world of the dead. It is the cold river of hatred that the gods swear oaths upon. And so there is an element of binding and honesty in these waters where the gods swear their unbreakable oaths. And we can consider the power in this and the commitment that an unbreakable oath demands, which is far different from the compartmentalization and the airy fantasy where Eros and Psyche were living before. The water of the river Styx demands rigorous honesty and commitment, and it implies a sense of morality that we become bound to as a ordering principle. According to James Hillman in his book Dream in the Underworld, um, the name Styx derives from the word strigo, to hate. And this is where we are confronted with the shadow and what we hate and reject about ourselves, which oftentimes is projected outward onto others or to those who we are closest with, who then reflect back these unwanted parts of ourselves. Hillman writes in Dream in the Underworld, the ego hates, abhors, and pursues with intent to destroy all objects which are for it a source of painful feelings. The true prototypes of the hate relation are derived not from sexual life, but from the struggle of the ego for self-preservation and self-maintenance. When confronted with the power of Pluto, we may turn to hatred as a form of self-preservation and the self-defense. Hillman continues, the ego here becomes Styx's instrument, a child of hatred, icily preserving itself against all enemies, the greatest of which will be warmth. Hence our usual notion that hate and love are contraries. Actually, hate has the same objective of love, according to Freud. Both seek pleasure, for which hatred uses the ego to destroy pain. Each of us becomes a child of Styx when we embark on the pain-killing course, justifying our victories and zeal in destruction in terms of self-preservation and ego development. The dissolution of these attitudes would mean reconverting the zeal and force of our ego strength back into the hatred that is its source. And this is what Psyche is doing when she goes to collect the water from Styx, or reconverting the ego strength to the icy waters of the river, of the underworld. And instead of operating from this place on an unconscious level, she is accessing the power of the subterranean river and integrating it as one of her tests in the process of soul making. Psyche is learning to integrate the pain-killing potentials of both love and hate by accessing and retrieving the waters from Styx and bringing it into the upper world. Not in a way that will destroy her, but in a way where she can become conscious of the power that this river holds. And she can confront the fear and hatred that Styx represents. And she opens herself to warmth at a deeper psychological level. As she takes this homeopathic dose of the icy water, she can let go of the ego protections that the hateful waters provided. And she can come into a better understanding of how the waters of Styx operate in her life. Aphrodite is also transformed through this act. Aphrodite, whose hatred of Psyche has driven this whole adventure, is beginning to soften towards the threat that this perceived rival poses. Hillman continues on saying, Styx is the limit setter, maintaining the psychic region to which even the Olympians must defend preserving, not the ego, but the underworld from the pain caused by invading attitudes of life. Styx not only separates the living from the dead, but it also protects the underworld or unconscious attitudes and stories that we hold from the life experience, which transform us at a soul level. As Psyche accesses this boundary between the conscious and unconscious realms, each side of the river is changed. The underworld of Pluto is transformed by the quest for love and meaningful connection, which the planet Venus embarks on. And, love provides a corrective experience, which may shift old stories and operating systems that are running below the surface of our conscious life. Venus in Gemini is transformed through the initiation these trials provide. Eros and Psyche are also transformed through this, but it requires them to leave the lofty ideals of love and descend to the depths to face the fear and desire for self-preservation that oftentimes can shut us off from love. The final test is for Psyche to enter into the underworld and retrieve a very fancy beauty cream from Persephone and to bring it back to Venus on Mount Olympus. Here, the goddess of the upper world, Venus, or Aphrodite, is sending Psyche to the goddess of the underworld. According to Eric Newman, these goddesses are two sides of the same coin. And Psyche finds herself placed between these two archetypes, and through her trials, she is learning to integrate both of them. The meeting with Persephone is kind of interesting because Persephone was transformed by her own encounter with Pluto. And she goes from being a sheltered maiden, or the Kore, into a powerful goddess who rules over the underworld. The trials that Psyche undergoes for love help her to step into her own power. Psyche is advised by a tower how to navigate the underworld and the tower says, don't accept any comfort or food or drink while you're down there, which is great advice if you ever travel to the underworld. For those who partake in the food of the dead have to stay there. And this is what happened to Persephone, which I like to think that she chose willingly, eating the 6 seeds of the pomegranate, which is a symbol of fertility, in order to create her own life as separate from the holding container that her mother Demeter had provided for her and was trying to keep her in. This was a way for Persephone to gain independence and to access her power as a queen and not to remain her mother's child for the rest of her days. But Psyche refuses food and a soft place to sit, choosing instead to sit on the hard ground, eating only a stale crust of bread. In this choice, the denial of the food and comfort of the underworld prevents an over-identification with the unconscious, which can get us stuck there. Psyche retrieves the beauty cream of the damned, which she is advised by her buddy, the Tower, not to ever use. But Psyche decides to ignore this advice and puts the beauty cream of death on, because why not? This stuff looks great. And this is a powerful moment in the story. When Psyche chooses not to just follow orders, which she has sort of done throughout the whole process, but to access this object that she literally went to hell and back to retrieve. And I think this is a key piece with Venus and Gemini. The ability to articulate our desire, to say what we want, to ask for what we need, to express what brings us joy and pleasure, and to be able to speak that into being. And when Psyche puts on the cream, she is able to access that power, not for somebody else, but for herself. However, the beauty cream of death puts the mortal Psyche into a deep sleep that she can never awake from. Eric Newman writes, the beauty ointment, it seems to us, represents Persephone's eternal youth, the eternal youth of death. It is the beauty of the Kore, the beauty of death-like sleep. It is known to us from tales of Sleeping Beauty and Snow White, where it is also induced by the bad mother, the stepmother, the old witch. It is the beauty of the glass coffin to which Psyche is expected to regress, the barren, frigid beauty of mere maidenhood without love. Preserved forever, it becomes the beauty of death, the beauty of Persephone, who is inhuman, since her existence is one of divine perfection, without fate, suffering, or knowledge. It is Aphrodite's secret aim to make Psyche die, to make her regress to the Chore Persephone stage, which was hers before the encounter with Eros. Here is the danger of returning to the idealized mental picture of Venus and Gemini, the image of love and beauty held aloft and in the clouds or in the glass coffin that resists the messiness and deep intimacy which the soul demands. First, Psyche loses Eros in the light when she lit the lantern and saw the truth of who she was with, and now she loses him in the dark of the underworld and the regression back into the image of beauty without substance or connection. However, Psyche's death causes Eros to transform. Newman continues saying, through Psyche's sacrifice and death, the divine lover is changed from the wounded boy to a man and savior, because in Psyche he finds something that exists only in the earthly human middle zone between heaven and underworld, the feminine mystery of rebirth through love. Eros breaks from his mother and rushes to Psyche and pleads with Zeus to make her immortal so that they can be together. And Zeus concedes, and Psyche is resurrected. And so here we have this image of Eros, that which drives us and activates the senses, the spirit of life, which finds connection with the human psyche. But Eros cannot meet the psyche until Psyche has been prepared through the initiation and trials of life to be able to meet this principle of life force and truly receive it. It requires Psyche's sacrifice, which also symbolizes autonomy and a break from the forces that directed her, in order for her to step into her own power and desire, which allows Eros to level up and choose the love of Psyche over his obligation and devotion to his mother Aphrodite. And so with Venus trine Pluto, we have these themes. The ideal needing to be brought back down to earth and transformed through the trials of the underworld, so we're able to come into a deeper connection with ourselves and create the space where the erotic sense of life force can enter into the psyche or soul and inspire us and draw us into life, which is not possible if we hide out in our lofty fantasy of love and beauty that lives in the clouds but never touches the earth. And through this process, we can learn to step into our power through accessing the erotic quality in ourselves and having the courage to recognize and speak our desires and ask for our needs to be met and lean into the messiness of life and love and allow ourselves to be changed and transformed by the initiation and trials that love asks of us to make space to live a more erotic and empowered life. So there you all go. That brings us to Friday, May the 1st, and we have a full moon in Scorpio at 11 degrees and 20 arc minutes. This is occurring at 10:23 a.m. Pacific time, making that 1:23 p.m. Eastern time. So let me switch the chart around and we'll get into it. All right. So here we have the sun in Taurus at 11 degrees and the moon across the zodiac in the fixed water sign of Scorpio at 11 degrees and 20 arc minutes. All right. So I have heard it said that the Buddha was born, became enlightened, and died under the Scorpio full moon. And this full moon occurs during the season of Taurus, which is the fixed sign of spring. And it is a reminder of the fall and the dying time that exists on the flip side of Taurus's time of growth and maintaining life. And it reminds us that in the midst of life, we are in death, etc. And that what we are growing and working on maintaining now will someday be harvested, threshed, and composted. This is the flip side of the coin, just as Aphrodite and Persephone are two sides of the same coin, two poles of love and life, and love and death, or life and death. So is Taurus and Scorpio. And while Taurus is fixed earth and is focused on maintaining the security and comfort and the simple pleasures of life, Scorpio is fixed water, which seeks to go deep and to know things from the inside out. Where Taurus is about simplicity and pleasure, Scorpio is about complexity and depth. With a full moon, it is a culmination of a emotional cycle. And in this water sign, we may find intense emotions rising to the surface. Scorpio seeks out intense emotional connection and deep intimacy. And this requires vulnerability, which is threatening because vulnerability leaves us open to the potential of pain. It can feel unsafe. So Scorpio seeks to create safety by understanding every angle, kind of arming itself with the exoskeleton of the scorpion and the poison-filled stinger. It longs for deep intimacy that vulnerability can bring, but it has a hard time trusting anything that can be safe enough to allow that emotional depth to occur. And so with this full moon in this water sign, it may draw the deep waters of Scorpio to the surface, which can bring up uncomfortable emotions like jealousy and resentment, which may be protective feelings. And as they are drawn to the surface, we get the opportunity to clear them, like dredging a pond to remove the decomposing matter that is settled at the bottom so the water can be made fresh and clear again. And it can feel safer for us to dive in. However, the process of pulling out the scum from the bottom may not be the most pleasant. It may feel grimy and messy, but it does allow us to move things through our system and to get a little bit more clarity and to increase our capacity for both vulnerability and the intimacy that the Scorpio parts of us so deeply desire. So also during Friday's full moon, we have Venus in Gemini, sextile Saturn in Aries. I'm gonna pass over that because I took up a lot of space with the Cupid and Psyche tale. However, I do want to talk about another aspect that we are experiencing on Friday, May the 1st, when we have Mercury in Aries forming a conjunction with Chiron in Aries. This is occurring at 27 degrees and 32 arc minutes. So going back to the sign, uh, going back to the chart, where we have Mercury right here, Chiron right there, as part of this whole Aries stellium. This is at the kind of waning degrees of Aries. So Mercury is the way that we process and communicate our individual experience of the world. Chiron is a symbol of our core wound. And when they come into contact with each other, Mercury might make up some stories about what's going on and how we're feeling. Mercury might tell us a story which is either helpful or unsupportive for our relationship with the wounded parts that Chiron reveals. In Buddhism, there's the parable of the two arrows, which I love. Like to hear it go. One day, this dude comes to the Buddha and says his friend shot him in the arm with an arrow. And the Buddha says, wow, that kind of sucks. Why don't you pull it out and get some medicine for that wound? And the man continues talking about all his worries connected to this arrow wound. What will happen if the wound gets infected? And then what if I lose my arm? And then who will take care of my family if I can't work anymore? What if we lose the farm? And then what if I die? And how will my family ever survive? And why did my friend shoot me why did my friend shoot me with this arrow in the first place? That guy is such a dick. This is so unfair. If only my friend didn't shoot me, then maybe my family wouldn't have to die in poverty. And the Buddha's like, whoa, cool story, bro. But do you see what you're doing there? You're taking an event which hurt you and you're making it so much worse. You just made up this whole ass story around this unfortunate event, which seems like it's hurting a lot more. Instead of doing all that, why don't you just pull out that dang arrow and go get some medicine for that wound and go on your way? And the moral of the story is that pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. There will be things that happen in our lives that objectively suck and are difficult and painful, but the stories we tell about these events increase our suffering. We get shot with an arrow, it hurts, right? But when we start telling stories about how much we resent that person who shot us, or start freaking out about how the future might unfold, we are taking that arrow and stabbing ourselves over and over and over again. And that is the second arrow. And the Buddha's wisdom is that we don't need to do that. Instead of going into story about how unfair that is and that we got shot and stabbing ourselves again and again, we can just drop the arrow and get some medicine for our wounds. So when Mercury meets Chiron, there is the opportunity to practice this parable in our lives. Part of Chiron's core wounds are the things that happen to us, which are not our fault, which are unjust and unfair. And Chiron's wound refuses to heal because they keep being pulled into the story of how unjust the wound is. With Mercury right here, we can very easily go into the story of how this is unfair and it's not my fault, and the world is against me, which does very little to heal our wounds. It actually only increases our suffering. So there's this opportunity to notice this and to just be with the wound as it gets activated instead of stabbing ourselves again and again. We can just drop the arrow in the story and try to find some medicine for our wounds. So Chiron is a symbol of the core wound as well as healing. And in the mythology, Chiron was also a mentor and a teacher. And one of his students was Asclepius, who is the god of healing and medicine. And Asclepius had these two vials that Athena gave him from Medusa, uh, from the blood of Medusa, excuse me. One vial of Medusa's blood gave the power to heal, and the other vial of Medusa's blood had the power to kill. So he also held this staff with a giant snake that curled around it. Now, Mercury also has a snake staff, except the caduceus of Mercury has two snakes that are entwined around it. And I've heard it said that one of these snakes held a poison that could kill, and the other had the power to heal, which is very similar to the vials of blood that Asclepius had. With these symbols, we see this sort of duality of life and death. The poison that kills when it is too much, and the substance that heals in the correct dose. And with this transit, we can think about the stories we tell about our wounds, to think about what is the correct dose, what amount might do us harm. Just like uh, just like a snake, a story can transform. It can shed its old skin and become a new story, which might be more supportive for our healing journey and more empowering for our lives. It's also interesting to note, just a little side note here, that the medical symbol used to be the staff of Asclepius with a single snake entwined around it. But there was this miscommunication and a misprint of the symbol sometime in the 40s on US military ambulances, and they printed the caduceus of Mercury instead of the staff of Asclepius. And somehow, through that mistake, the symbol became the standard as the medical symbol. While Asclepius was the god of healing, Mercury is a god of commerce, the marketplace, and exchange. And this was around the time in America where the concept of health insurance started to take hold. So, with this mix up of the symbols, we have medicine beginning to move from a healing art into a more business oriented model, which we are still living in that mess. Anyway, back to our tale. Both Mercury and Chiron have connections with Apollo, who's a god of music, poetry, medicine, and prophecy. Chiron was raised by Apollo and learned the healing arts from him and his sister Artemis. Mercury is the brother of Apollo and traded him the lyre for the caduceus staff, which he carries. When Mercury Hermes was born, he made the first lyre from a tortoiseshell. And a lyre is a stringed instrument for those of y'all who don't know. But I think the double meaning of this instrument is important with this conjunction to Chiron. On one hand, music has the power to heal. It was one of Apollo's arts, along with medicine. And there are long traditions of music's healing power. Marsilio Ficino, the Renaissance physician and astrological magician, did a lot of work around the healing power of music as well as musical correspondences with the planets. On the other hand, a liar, aside from being a musical instrument, is somebody who doesn't tell the truth. And while the lyre as a musical instrument may have the power to inspire and heal, somebody who tells lies may keep us stuck in self-defeating stories. Mercury is a trickster. And if we think about the planet as our cognitive abilities and the ways that we process and share information, we can begin to consider the lies we have been told and the lies we tell ourselves, and the ways these lies, obfuscations, and untruths may create illness in an individual and in a culture. Something to think about with this transit is how the lies we may be telling ourselves keep us stuck, or if we have internalized lies that have been told to us by our culture, our society, our caregivers, that are keeping us stuck in old stories which no longer serve us and may be impeding our growth or ability to heal. This conjunction is occurring in Aries, which is a sign that asks for courage. And here we may need to summon the courage to see the truth about ourselves and the world in order to show up in more honest and heroic ways for ourselves and for the things that we care about. Another way that I'm looking at this transit is that Mercury is a messenger god, and Chiron is a healer as well as a mentor. And when they come together, we can receive messages that support our healing process, that help us to show up as better mentors and teachers. This may be a good day to leave some space and to just notice the information that we receive and what arises to see how that can support our healing process. If we don't get lost in the stories we are telling about how unfair it is that we should be wounded, Mercury may just show up with the medicine we have been needing all along. Another way of accessing the healing messages that Mercury may bring is through dreams. And dream healing was one of the ways that the Greeks dealt with illness, both mental and physical. Chiron's student, Asclepius, who I talked about earlier, was the god of healing, and he would appear to people in their dreams and offer them insight into the source of their illness and the remedy that would alleviate it. Dreams may be a vehicle that the unconscious, as well as the archetypal forces, can communicate with the conscious mind. So during this transit, it may be helpful to pay attention to your dreams and see what arises and how that can support your healing process moving forward. And then last, and real quick, on Saturday, May the 2nd, we have Mercury entering Taurus, which gives us access to somatic information, learning to listen to the messages of the body and the senses. Is this somatic awareness and sensual intelligence that Mercury is offering in the fixed Earth sign of Taurus. So we can consider, what information am I picking up through my body, through my skin, through the smells and sounds, to notice what is pleasing, what feels good. Which of these sensations do I value? Taurus is simple, and it can help us to detach from the story we are telling about our experience and to just stay in the sensation as a way of gathering actual data about our experience in our lives and how it feels to be present in this moment, focusing on whether sensations are pleasurable, neutral, or unpleasant without needing to go into the story about what that means. Just practicing being with what is. And some advice for Mercury and Taurus is just keep it simple. And that may be a really good exercise to practice for the next couple of weeks until Mercury moves into their home sign of Gemini. And with that, my friends, that is all the astro weather that is fit to print. Thank you for tuning in. I hope this was helpful to somebody out there. And again, I'm going to be taking a break for a couple weeks so I can go facilitate a dream retreat in Greece. I hope to see some of you there. And if not, Sarah Janes, who's leading this retreat, is running a couple other ones this season. So check her out at Sarah Janes on Instagram, and or at Sarah Janes Dreaming on Instagram, and The website is themysteries.org, so you can check out the other offerings that she has. And yeah, I hopefully will be doing at least one of these a year. So if I don't get to catch you this time, hopefully next time. And yeah, I'm go take a little vacation and I'll see y'all in June. Thanks again for tuning in. And until next time, be good to yourselves, be good to each other. And as always, may the force be with you. Bye now.